Hi, my name is Erica Jones, and you're watching the Archetypal News Network. I am a practicing astrologer, and I also offer mystical arts and metaphysical healing at realimaginal.com. In this video, I will offer an overview of the full moon in Gemini for December 2022, focusing on what we might expect from a psychological and more personal perspective. So the ebullient full moon in Gemini will break over eastern horizons on December 7th, reaching her maximum fullness at 8:08 p.m. U.S. Pacific Time. The Sagittarius Sun's exploratory arrow will also be poking directly into the fiery red planet Mars, who is exactly conjoined with this full moon. While Sagittarius is fun-loving and Gemini likes to keep things fresh and exciting, Mars' special brand of excitement might take things over the edge in a flare-up of passions. Passionate intensities related to sexuality, competition, self-preservation, or the preservation of ideals and ideas, the achievement of goals, um, and perhaps just the sheer force of willpower could burst out under this full moon. Full moons always bring up pretty high tides of emotion, and having Mars there just adds, like I said, a bit more excitement than usual. And Mars isn't exactly a subtle energy. So regardless of what range of emotional intensities are illuminated under the Gemini full moon, this very lively combination of energies is likely to result in very direct verbalization, along with the courage or maybe recklessness to express it loud enough for all to notice. So we're likely to be a bit too impulsive and act without much reflection on what the consequences might be, simply because we're being a bit too naive about ourselves or the situation, or maybe we're just totally possessed by our feelings and quite upset with the situation. So under these skies, many of us will be spurred to clear the air of confusions or misunderstandings, or to address injustices or perceived wrongs. That's very much the activity of Mars, who is the activist of the planets. And through, such impulses can be coming from the right place, but everyone's likely to be pretty thin-skinned under this full moon of December 7th, easily taking offense at words or actions, and no one being quite willing to back down or de-escalate. But we may also see conflicts within ourselves that are provoked as well, and struggles with others could help us recognize our own inner confusions or where we're working at cross purposes, and how we might be undermining our own achievements by pursuing too many goals at once. There is a particular potency with this full moon. The spotlighting power of the sun is shining directly on Mars at the midpoint of Mars's retrograde cycle. So Mars entered his shadow September 3rd. The shadow is retrograde, and stationed or stood still, appeared to stand still in the sky October 30th, and has been moving backwards, retracing his steps since then. And we're at the midpoint. And with the sun's illumination of Mars, particularly given the full moon, the extra intensity brought by this lunation, we could have a little bit more added to the intrigue of what has been building since September 3rd or so, since Mars has been working through the retrograde cycle. And we may find ourselves simultaneously wanting to just plunge ahead with our goals, and yet needing to stop and really genuinely assess, is this the right path for me? Do I have the energy to pursue this or these many goals and activities, or is something or someone draining me of energy? Whatever area of life has received a boost of Mars's high energy will be really calling for our attention, especially if we have resisted the pressure to act. So Mars retrograde will be with us. He stations direct on January 12th and will leave the shadow of his retrograde, that is complete retracing, the retracing of his steps, on March 16th. So we still have a ways to go. Under this full moon and around this period of time, Mercury is squaring Jupiter and entering the sign of Capricorn. So the Gemini full moon is actually said to be ruled by the planet of communication, Mercury. Mercury holds a lot of sway in the sign of Gemini and functions very highly. So if we look at what Mercury is doing, it can tell us a little bit more about this full moon. And Mercury will just have moved into the somber sign of Capricorn on December 6th. And we'll be finishing up a tense square aspect to the expansive energy of Jupiter. That square is exact on December 5th. So Mercury-Jupiter combination is another indicator of an exaggerated full moon kind of feeling, just the outsized emotions and a tendency to excessive speech where fewer words will suffice. It can also, however, indicate receiving a fresh perspective on what this Mars retrograde wants to bring forth in our lives. So much about this Mars retrograde period of time involves evaluating and refining our choices to find the right mix of goals and activities, and just determining how we're going to split our energies and allowing any kind of experimentation to naturally evolve as we gain greater understanding. But we can find ourselves tossed into the mix as Mercury heads towards their final retrograde for the year. So Mercury will be entering the shadow of their retrograde on December 12th, just 5 days after this lunation, and will appear to stand still in the sky on December 29th, retracing their steps through Capricorn until they return to direct motion on January 19th. And will go back over the retrograde shadow through February 7th. So Mercury will spend this entire 2 months in Capricorn. So Mercury is hanging out in Capricorn December 6th through February 11th. And they would ordinarily only spend a few weeks there. So this is a kind of a standout. And adds more emphasis to this period of time and what Mercury might be trying to bring forth in this more Saturnian Capricorn style. It really emphasizes the needs to define our boundaries and limits, to be consistent and to set achievable goals for ourselves. It'll play off of that Mars retrograde in that way of asking us to be realistic. Excitement is great, energy is great, but it's limited. What will really sustain over the long term is something that Capricorn, which has more of Saturn's style to it, will bring forward. And many of us will actually also be spending this Mercury retrograde period in a process of discernment around our allies, who our allies are, and who we would be better off kind of releasing or taking distance from. And as well as having many of us transform our relationships in partnerships of all kinds. And sometimes it's our ideas, really. Mercury is our ideas, and our ideas about people or energies might be undergoing transformation because when Mercury stations retrograde on December 29th, he'll be right on top of Venus, the planet of partnership, of harmony, of love, of grace, and Pluto, which is all about transformation and rebirthing and moving through karmic consequences, metabolizing those and creating something completely new. So this Mercury retrograde, it may be the literal partnerships transforming or our ideas about partnerships. And it's not just people. So people and energies will undergo transformation. Maybe we'll see the roles that we play for each other much more clearly. We'll get some perspective on that. But including, again, not just human beings, but also archetypal forces such as money, love, beauty, and pleasure. All of those Venusian topics are a feature of the incoming Mercury retrograde. Now, we also have Venus square Jupiter and Venus square Neptune. So Venus is the planet that signifies money, love, beauty, pleasure. And she's making a challenging square aspect, which is exact on December 3rd to Neptune. This will stir up our ideal images of enjoyment and divine union, love and abundance. And on the difficult end of the spectrum, Neptune can bring a bit of a tinge of the unreal or the unrealizable. That which is transcendent and just out of reach, it remains ideal and has this tendency. Venus-Neptune can set the most attractive things just out of our grasp so that we can see them but can't quite touch them. And it could be that perhaps for some of us, we've worked ourselves into a romanticized fantasy about a person or a project or a partnership, only to meet with the intensities of the Gemini full moon on December 7th. And at that moment, some reality may begin to puncture the fantasy. And it's important to remember that the sour taste of disillusionment is not reality itself. The opposite of an over-idealization is probably just another over-idealization. And it's really challenging with so much Martian, Mars, impulsive, quick-acting energy under that full moon. But it's wise to restrain our impulse, to wait for a little while to draw conclusions after this full moon. If there is some disillusionment, if there is some rupture of what feels like maybe was fantastical, let our emotions settle out a bit and the full truth will become apparent. Because again, that bitter taste of well, that wasn't real, isn't necessarily real either. So on the positive side of Venus-Neptune influence this week, it'll be important to really let our hearts expand and to imagine big, to reach for the stars above, so that we can welcome in some new life-giving energy and hope. As the poet Rainer Maria Rilke puts it, the future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens. So the future must enter us long before it happens. And Neptune, the planet of dreams, imagination, and illusion, appears to stand still in the sky. Neptune is stationing to return to direct motion on December 3rd, which really emphasizes his powers and influence in our lives. And it will be equally important to give the dreams that we can capture at this time an honorable and a fitting place in our lives. What begins as aspiration can eventually become concrete over time, so that the values that these dreams represent can guide us to the financial or to other energy exchanges, which can really make those dreams real in this world. So when Venus enters Capricorn on December 9th, until January 2nd, she's going to shift gears to the brass tacks of how do we attract what we need, being very realistic, very Saturnian, and just doesn't have time to entertain big dreams. So catch those things while you can and find the right place for them. Wrap them in your heart cloth so that they can grow roots over time. Especially with Venus square Jupiter, which will be exact on December 9th, there is this strong element of seeking freedom and expansion, exploring new opportunities and social scenes. So the time for experimentation with beauty and with love is now. And many of us will have to consider the merits of independence and of partnership and the benefits and constraints of both. Venus-Jupiter under these skies could also have us spending a bit too much money on luxury items, which is that's another impulse we might all want to be wary of. If we've got it to spend, great, have fun with that. But look out for impulsive spending on something that we might regret later. So many of us do need more spontaneity in our lives and a willingness to take risks. The Gemini full moon suggests really that we be gentle with ourselves and others as we move through any emotional overwhelm and find the courage to truly embrace what will serve our highest good. Thank you so much for listening or watching. And again, you're watching the Archetypal News Network. My name is Erica Jones, and I offer astrological consultations as well as metaphysical healing and other mystical arts at my website, Real Imaginal, RealImaginal.com, realimaginal.com. And I hope to see you again in the future for these full moon forecasts. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions.